You're experiencing time twice as fast as when you were 10 years old. Not metaphorically, literally. Your brain is processing temporal duration at half the rate it used to. A year at 40 feels exactly as long as 6 months felt at 20. And by the time you're 80, time will be moving 4 times faster than it did in childhood. This isn't psychology. This is measurable, predictable neuroscience. And it explains why your life is disappearing faster every year. If you want to understand the actual mechanics of reality, not just surface-level explanations, this channel goes deep. Subscribe so you don't miss what's coming. Now, let's talk about why time is slipping through your fingers. Here's what everyone notices but nobody can explain. When you were 7 years old, summer vacation felt infinite. 3 months was an eternity. You lived entire lifetimes between June and September. Now, at 30 or 40 or 50, 3 months vanishes before you notice it started. December arrives and you're still processing March. You blink and a year is gone. You blink again and 5 years disappeared. Everyone experiences this. Everyone knows it's real, but most people treat it as a quirky psychological phenomenon. Something about being busy or having less novelty, or just the vague sense that time feels different as you age. That's not what's happening. What's happening is that your subjective experience of temporal duration is mathematically diverging from clock time at an accelerating rate. And it's not random, it's predictable. It follows precise patterns that neuroscience can measure and mathematics can model. This isn't about perception or attitude or how you spend your days. This is about the fundamental architecture of how your brain constructs the experience of time passing. And once you understand the mechanism, you can't unsee it. You'll recognize exactly why childhood felt so long and why adulthood feels like it's on fast forward. Over the next 25 minutes, we're going to explore 3 things. First, the neuroscience of how your brain actually builds temporal experience and why that process changes as you age. Second, the mathematical relationship that governs subjective time perception, a ratio that's been hiding in plain sight your entire life. And third, what this reveals about the nature of time itself. Because if subjective time and clock time can diverge this dramatically, which one is actually real? By the end, you'll understand why your life is accelerating, and you'll see that it's not a bug in perception. It's the inevitable consequence of how consciousness interfaces with duration. Let's begin with what scientists discovered when they actually measured how the brain experiences time. Neuroscientists have known for decades that the brain doesn't have a clock. There's no internal metronome ticking away seconds and minutes. Instead, the brain constructs the experience of time through a process that's more like building a narrative than measuring duration. And here's where it gets strange. The length of that narrative, the felt sense of how much time has passed, depends on how much processing the brain had to do, not how much time actually elapsed, how much mental activity occurred. In the early 2000s, researchers at Duke University ran experiments that isolated this mechanism. They showed subjects identical video clips, but manipulated how much information the brain had to process. When the clips contained rapid scene changes, multiple elements moving simultaneously, and novel information requiring attention, subjects consistently reported that more time had passed. Not a little more, significantly more. When the clips were static, familiar, repetitive, subjects reported that less time had passed. Same duration, same number of seconds, completely different subjective experience. The brain wasn't measuring time, it was measuring how much it had to work. This explains something you've probably noticed, but never quite understood. When you're learning something new, when everything is unfamiliar and demanding attention, time feels slow, dense, full. An hour of learning a new skill feels longer than an hour of routine work. Not because you're bored or engaged, but because the brain is encoding more, processing more, building a richer temporal narrative. Now apply this to childhood. Everything is new. Every experience requires active processing. Your brain is constantly encoding, constantly building dense temporal narratives. That's why childhood feels so long. It's not nostalgia, it's neurology. Your brain was doing more computational work per unit of clock time, which created a denser subjective experience of duration. As you age, the inverse happens. More experiences become familiar. More patterns are recognized automatically. The brain does less active processing per unit of time. the temporal narrative becomes sparser, and subjective time compresses. But here's what makes this truly disturbing. This isn't just about novelty, it's about neural efficiency. As your brain gets better at predicting patterns, it does less processing. It takes shortcuts, and those shortcuts make time vanish. This brings us to the second piece of evidence, and this one is purely mathematical. In the 1980s, a physicist named Peter Mangan proposed what's now called the proportional theory of time perception. The idea is devastatingly simple. Subjective time is proportional to the total time you've already lived. A year at age 10 represents 10% of your entire life experience. A year at age 50 represents 2% of your life experience. Same duration in clock time, completely different proportion of accumulated experience. And the brain, it turns out, tracks time proportionally, not absolutely, which means that as you age, each unit of clock time represents a smaller and smaller fraction of your total lived experience, and therefore feels proportionally shorter. Let's make this concrete. When you're 10 years old, 1 year is 10% of your life. It feels substantial. When you're 20, 1 year is 5%. When you're 40, it's 2.5%. When you're 80, it's 1.25%. Each year represents half the subjective duration of the equivalent year a decade earlier. This isn't metaphor, this is ratio. If you model this mathematically, you get a logarithmic curve. Subjective time accelerates exponentially as absolute age increases. By the time you're 50, time is moving roughly twice as fast as it did at 25. By 80, it's moving 4 times as fast as it did at 20. And this matches reported experience with eerie precision. When researchers survey people across age groups and ask them to estimate how long various periods felt, the responses align almost perfectly with the proportional model. Old people aren't exaggerating when they say time flies. They're reporting accurate subjective duration. Their experience of a year at 70 genuinely feels like 6 weeks felt at 20. The mathematics predict it. The neuroscience confirms it, and the lived experience validates it. But there's a third component that makes this even more unsettling, and this one cuts to the heart of what time actually is. Researcher Claudia Hammond studied how the brain encodes memory and its relationship to temporal perception. She found that the density of memory formation directly correlates with the subjective feeling of time passage. More memories encoded equals longer felt duration. Fewer memories equals compressed time. And here's the mechanism. When you're in a novel environment, learning something new, or experiencing something emotionally significant, the brain creates rich, detailed memories with multiple neural tags. Later, when you recall that period, the sheer density of stored information makes it feel like more time passed. Your brain essentially reads the thickness of the memory record and infers duration. This is why a week-long vacation to a new place feels much longer than a week of routine work. More memory density, thicker temporal record, longer subjective duration. But as you age and fall into routine, memory encoding becomes sparse. Days blur together. Weeks become indistinguishable. Your brain encodes less because less is novel. And when you look back, there's almost nothing there. Months vanish because you created almost no distinct memories. Your brain reads an empty record and concludes that almost no time passed. Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman identified this as the difference between the experiencing self and the remembering self. The experiencing self lives through each moment. The remembering self constructs narrative from memory. And it's the remembering self that determines how long life felt. If you spend 10 years in pure routine, creating minimal distinct memories, your remembering self will look back and feel like almost no time passed. Not because you were unhappy, not because you were bored, but because there's almost no memory record to read. Your brain concludes that 10 years was maybe 2 years worth of subjective experience. And here's what's genuinely disturbing about this. It means that right now, as you age and settle into routine, you're not just living faster, you're retroactively erasing duration. The years you're living through right now might become, in memory, a fraction of their actual length. Time isn't just speeding up, it's disappearing. Quick note, if you haven't subscribed yet, and you're finding value in this level of depth, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what's coming. And if you're noticing you understand this intellectually but want help applying it in practice, I created something specific for that gap. It's called the manifestation path. Link in the description. I'll leave it there for you later. Now, let's go deeper into what this means. So we've established the mechanism. Neurologically, your brain constructs time through processing load. Mathematically, each year represents a smaller proportion of total life. Mnemonically, subjective duration is determined by memory density. All three converge on the same conclusion. Time accelerates as you age, not because of perception, but because of architecture. But now we need to address the philosophical earthquake this creates. If subjective time and clock time diverge this dramatically, which one is real? The physicist's answer would be clock time. Time is what clocks measure. It's objective, absolute, external to consciousness. 1 second is 1 second, regardless of how you experience it. But here's the problem with that answer. You don't live in clock time. You live in subjective time. Every single moment of your existence is mediated through consciousness. You never experience a second directly. You experience your brain's construction of duration. And if that construction compresses a year into what feels like 2 months, then phenomenologically, functionally, experientially, it was 2 months. Your actual lived duration was 2 months. The clock says 12, but you lived 2. Which measurement captures reality? This isn't just philosophy. This connects directly to how ancient traditions understood time. In Buddhist phenomenology, they distinguished between conventional time and experienced time. Conventional time is the agreed-upon measurement, the construct we use to coordinate. Experienced time is actual lived duration, the thickness of presence, how long consciousness dwells in each moment. They argued that conventional time is useful fiction, and experienced time is actual reality. And they had practices specifically designed to expand experienced time by increasing presence and memory encoding. Modern neuroscience accidentally rediscovered what they knew 2,000 years ago. Phenomenologically, time is what consciousness makes it. If your consciousness compresses duration actually compressed for you. Your life actually got shorter. Not metaphorically, literally. You lived less time. Now I want you to try something. Right now, as you're listening to this, notice the experience of this moment passing. Don't analyze it. Don't think about it. Just notice. How long does this moment feel? How thick is the experience? Can you detect the passage of time? Or does it only become apparent when you look back and realize time has moved? Here's what you'll probably notice. There's no sensation of time passing in the moment itself. Time only appears in retrospect. When you look back and realize that what was future is now past. But in the actual moment of experience, there's just presence, just the contents of consciousness arising, no time moving, no duration felt. Time is constructed in memory, not experienced in presence, which raises an unsettling question. If time only exists when you look back, if there's no sensation of duration in the present moment itself, is time real at all? Or is it always a retroactive construction, a narrative your brain builds to make sense of change? And if time is retroactive, if it only exists in memory, then the acceleration you're experiencing as you age isn't time speeding up. It's your brain building thinner temporal narratives. You're constructing less time, not experiencing time moving faster, constructing less of it, which means the solution isn't to slow down time. That's impossible. The solution is to build more time, to construct denser temporal experience by encoding more memories, processing more novelty, staying present to experience rather than autopiloting through it. Because here's what almost nobody understands. The reason childhood felt long isn't because time moved slowly. It's because you were present, you were encoding, you were processing, you were building thick temporal narratives because everything demanded attention. As you age and enter routine, you stop encoding, you start autopiloting. An autopilot doesn't build time, it erases it. So the years vanish, not because they moved fast, but because you weren't there, you didn't construct them. Let me give you a direct example of this. Think about the last year of your life. How much of it can you actually remember? Not vague impressions, specific moments, distinct experiences. If you're honest, It's probably shockingly little. Maybe a handful of significant events, maybe a few emotional moments, but vast stretches of nothing. Weeks that left no trace, months that became a blur. That's not because nothing happened, it's because you encoded almost nothing. You were on autopilot, and autopilot doesn't create memories. It creates gaps, empty temporal space, which your brain later reads as almost no time. So the year that just passed might feel, in retrospect, like it was 2 months long. Not because time moved fast, but because you only built 2 months worth of temporal experience. You lived 1 year in clock time, but 2 months in subjective time. The other 10 months simply didn't get constructed. And this is where the mechanism becomes genuinely haunting. Because it means you can live 50 years, and in terms of actual accumulated subjective experience, only live 10 years. You can have a long life in clock time and a short life in experience time. And it's the experience time that matters. That's what you'll remember. That's what will constitute your actual life. If you spend 30 years in deep routine, autopiloting through days, encoding minimal memory, those 30 years might compress into what feels like 5 years of subjective duration. You didn't live 30, you lived 5. The clock tracked 30, but consciousness only built 5. And when you're 80 and you look back, those decades will feel like they barely existed, because they barely did. You didn't construct them. Now, before this becomes completely nihilistic, understand what this reveals. It means that subjective lifespan is not fixed by biology. It's constructed by consciousness. 2 people can live to 80. One might experience 40 years of subjective time because they stayed present and encoded richly. The other might experience 15 years because they autopiloted through everything. Same biological duration, completely different lived duration. Which means the actual length of your life, the amount of time you genuinely experience existing, is not determined by how many years you survive. It's determined by how present you are while surviving them. This completely inverts the normal understanding of longevity. The question isn't how long you live in years, it's how much time you construct while living, and that's entirely within your control. So let's bring all the threads together now. We started with a simple observation. Time speeds up as you age. Everyone knows it. Everyone feels it. But we've shown that it's not a feeling. It's mechanism. Neurologically, your brain constructs time through processing load, and as pattern recognition improves, processing decreases, and constructed time compresses. Mathematically, each year represents a smaller proportion of accumulated life, and subjective duration tracks proportion, not absolute time, which means time literally, measurably accelerates on a logarithmic curve. And mnemonically, temporal experience is determined by memory encoding density. Sparse encoding creates thin subjective time. Rich encoding creates thick subjective time. All 3 mechanisms converge on the same truth. The acceleration isn't perception, it's architecture. But here's the revelation that recontextualizes everything. Time isn't external, it's constructed. It doesn't exist independently of consciousness. It's a property of how consciousness organizes experience. The physicist can point to atomic clocks and say, time is objective. But you never experience those clocks. You experience your brain's model of duration, and that model is phenomenologically real. When a year compresses into 2 months, you didn't live 12 months. You lived 2. That's your actual life, your actual existence. The clock is a measuring device. Consciousness is the thing being measured, and consciousness can build more or less time from the same amount of change, which means this. The length of your life is not determined by how many years pass. It's determined by how much time you construct from those years. 2 people can live to 70. One experiences 30 years of subjective time because they autopiloted through decades. The other experiences 60 years because they stayed present and encoded richly. Same biological lifespan, double the lived duration. One person actually lived twice as long, not metaphorically, literally. Their subjective lifespan, the actual amount of time they experienced existing, was twice as long. Same number of birthdays, completely different amount of life. And this reveals something that borders on the mystical, but is purely mechanistic. You can extend your life not by adding years, but by constructing more time from the years you have. Presence doesn't slow time, It builds more of it. Memory encoding doesn't preserve time. It creates time retroactively. Novelty doesn't make time feel longer. It literally makes your life longer in the only sense that matters, which is lived subjective duration. You want to know how to live longer? Don't obsess over adding years to your lifespan. Obsess over adding time to your years. Stay present so you encode more. Seek novelty so you process more. Break routine so you construct more. Because a life spent present, even if it's biologically short, can be subjectively longer than a life spent asleep at the wheel for decades. This is why people on their deathbed often say their life felt short, even if they lived to 90. Not because time moved fast, but because they didn't build much time. They autopiloted. They created gaps. And when they looked back, there was almost nothing there. The years happened. The time didn't get constructed. Conversely, some people die young, but when you read their biographies, their lives feel impossibly full. They packed multiple lifetimes into 30 years, not because they were busy, but because they were present. They encoded richly. They constructed massive amounts of subjective time from limited clock time. They actually lived longer than most people who survived to 80 because they built more time. And this is the final implication that completely inverts normal thinking. The question you should be asking isn't how long will I live? It's how much time am I building? Because those are not the same question. Longevity is clock time. Life is constructed time. And only one of them actually matters. You've lived this cycle before. You watch a video like this. You have a deep insight. You feel something shifted. For 2-3 days, you act differently. Then it's back to normal. The autopilot reassumes control. And 6 months later, you're in the same place, watching another video, having the same insight, feeling the same frustration. This cycle exists for a reason. Insights don't change identity. Conscious repetition changes identity. The manifestation path is the system that breaks this cycle. 3 workbooks that take you from momentary clarity to sustained transformation. 28 days practicing daily until acting consciously stops being effort and becomes your new baseline. It's not about having more insights. It's about finally consolidating the ones you've already had. Link in the description. Let's break this cycle once and for all. Here are 2 practices you can start immediately. First practice, the evening inventory. Tonight before sleep, try to recall 10 distinct moments from today. Not vague summaries, specific moments. The texture of your coffee cup, a sentence someone said, the light through a window. If you can't find 10, that's your answer about why time is vanishing. You didn't encode the day. Second practice, deliberate novelty. Once per week, do something you've never done before. Doesn't matter what. Take a different route. Try a new food. Learn one phrase in a language you don't speak. The goal isn't enjoyment. It's forcing your brain to encode. Novel experience creates memory density, which constructs time. These aren't profound practices. They're mechanical. But mechanism is what creates change. Time is accelerating, not because physics changed, but because your brain changed how it builds temporal experience. You went from encoding everything to encoding almost nothing, from presence to autopilot, from constructing thick time to constructing thin time. The years are passing at the same rate they always did, but you're building less life from them, which means your actual lived duration, the only thing that actually matters, is compressing. You're living less time because you're constructing less time. But construction is a choice. Presence is a choice. Encoding is a choice. You can't add years to your life. That's biology. But you can add time to your years. That's consciousness. And consciousness is the only thing you've ever had control over. The question isn't how long will you survive. It's how much time will you build while surviving. And that question gets answered every single day by whether you show up present or asleep. Choose presence. Build time. That's how you live longer than your lifespan. If this changed how you understand your experience of time, leave a like and drop a comment. When you think back on the last year of your life, how much of it can you actually distinctly remember? Let me know what you find when you look back, honestly.